In just 19 seconds, $47 million in questionable donations would surface. Pam Bondi didn't expect the spotlight to turn on her. She walked into that hearing room like she owned the narrative, but her leather portfolio trembled slightly in her grip. Cameras focused. The chamber held its breath. Congressman Dan Goldman sat perfectly still, watching her with the patience of someone who knew exactly what cards he was holding. What did Bondi demand that would expose her own dark financial connections to the very network she claimed to investigate? At exactly 2:17 p.m., on a humid Thursday afternoon in Washington, the House Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Mahogany desks gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. 23 cameras from major networks positioned themselves around the perimeter like predators circling wounded prey. The air conditioning hummed, but tension made the room feel stifling anyway. Pam Bondi entered through the west corridor, her heels clicking against marble floors with military precision. Navy blazer pressed to perfection, briefcase clutched tightly, American flag pin gleaming on her lapel. She looked like someone who had never lost an argument in her life, but her hands betrayed her confidence, fingers drumming nervously against the leather handle of her case as she approached the witness table. Across from her, Congressman Dan Goldman adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and flipped through a manila folder marked "Confidential" in red letters. His expression remained neutral, almost bored, as if this was just another Tuesday afternoon. He wore a simple, gray suit, no flashy accessories, no theatrical gestures. But anyone who knew Goldman understood that his calmest moments preceded his most devastating attacks. The committee chairman gaveled the session to order. Today we examine allegations of federal oversight failures regarding the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Ms. Bondi, you have requested this hearing to address what you call a systematic cover-up of evidence. Bondi stood, clearing her throat with the authority of someone who had spent 8 years as Florida's Attorney General. Thank you, Chairman. I'm here because the American people deserve answers about missing evidence in the Epstein case. Documents have vanished, witnesses have been silenced, and certain members of this very committee have actively obstructed justice. Her voice carried across the chamber with practiced authority. This was her element, her stage. She had prosecuted dozens of high-profile cases, faced down criminals and corrupt officials alike. Today would be no different, or so she believed. Goldman's eyebrows raised slightly, the only indication he found her opening statement interesting. He leaned forward into his microphone, voice steady and measured. Miss Bondi, those are serious allegations. I assume you have evidence to support these claims? I absolutely do. Bondi snapped open her briefcase with theatrical flair, producing a thick stack of papers. These documents prove that critical Epstein evidence was deliberately withheld from state prosecutors in phone records, financial transactions, witness statements, all conveniently lost or misfiled. The gallery murmured. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in on the documents in Bondi's hands. This was the moment she had been building toward, her grand revelation that would expose the conspiracy she claimed to have uncovered. Goldman nodded thoughtfully, then reached for his own folder. That's fascinating, Miss Bondi. Before we examine your evidence, would you mind if I asked about your own involvement with Epstein-related investigations? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Bondi's face. I'm not sure what you mean, Congressman. Well, as Florida's Attorney General from 2011 to 2019, you would have had oversight responsibilities for any state-level investigations into Epstein's activities, correct? Bondi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's correct, but I'm here to discuss federal failures, not relitigate state procedures. Goldman smiled, the kind of smile that made defense attorneys nervous. Of course, But for context, the committee should understand your role in these events. He opened his folder, revealing what appeared to be financial documents. Ms. Bondi, are you familiar with the $25,000 donation made to your Political Action Committee in September? The chamber fell silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Bondi's papers rustled as her grip tightened. Congressman, I've received thousands of donations over my career. I can't be expected to remember. This particular donation came from the Donald J. Trump Foundation. Goldman continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. It was made just 3 days after your office announced it was reviewing complaints about Trump University. Do you recall that donation now? Sweat began to form at Bondi's hairline. I fail to see how this relates to the Epstein investigation. Goldman turned a page in his folder. Movements deliberate and unhurried. The connection is quite relevant, Ms. Bondi. You see, that same Trump Foundation made a $47 million payment to a consulting firm called Strategic Advisory Solutions in 2016. Are you familiar with that company? Bondi's face had gone pale. Her confident posture began to crumble as she realized where Goldman was heading. That's not, you're changing the subject. Actually, I'm staying exactly on subject. Goldman's voice remained calm, but his words hit like hammer blows. Strategic Advisory Solutions was a shell company created by Jeffrey Epstein to launder money through political donations. Your PAC received funds that were directly traceable to Epstein's network. The hearing room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Camera flashes strobed like lightning. Committee members leaned into their microphones, demanding order. But Goldman continued speaking, his voice cutting through the chaos. Not only did you accept money connected to Epstein's operation, Ms. Bondi, but your office actively declined to investigate complaints about Epstein's Florida activities in 2014 and 2016. Complaints that came with documentary evidence of underage trafficking. Bondi tried to stand, but her legs seemed unsteady. Papers scattered from her hands onto the floor. This is a smear campaign. You're twisting facts. These aren't facts I'm twisting, Miss Bondi. Goldman held up a bank document. This is a copy of the actual wire transfer from Strategic Advisory Solutions to your Americans for Economic Freedom PAC. $47 million routed through 3 offshore accounts, all controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. The committee chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, but order had completely broken down. Republican members shouted procedural objections. Democrats demanded to see Goldman's evidence. News anchors spoke rapidly into cameras, trying to convey the magnitude of what was unfolding. But Bondi just stood there, frozen, as the weight of Goldman's revelation crushed her carefully constructed narrative. The woman who had entered the room demanding the accountability for others now faced questions about her own complicity in the very corruption she claimed to expose. Twitter exploded with hashtags. Bondigate began trending within minutes. Epstein files climbed the charts as users shared clips of Goldman's bombshell revelation. MSNBC cut to live coverage. CNN assembled an emergency panel. Fox News found itself in the uncomfortable position of defending someone they had championed just hours earlier. Goldman wasn't finished. He pulled out another document, this one bearing official letterhead. Ms. Bondi, this is a letter from your office to the FBI in 2015, declining to participate in a joint federal-state task force investigating Epstein's financial network. You personally signed this letter. Can you explain to the committee why you refused federal assistance in investigating someone you now claim was protected by a conspiracy? Bondi's mouth opened and closed, wordlessly. The papers in her hands shook visibly now. Her prepared statements, her carefully rehearsed accusations, all seemed worthless in the face of Goldman's methodical destruction of her credibility. The state has limited resources. We couldn't commit to every federal initiative. Her voice had lost all its earlier authority, becoming small and defensive. But you found resources to investigate voter fraud cases that same year, didn't you? Goldman's questions came like precision strikes. Cases that resulted in zero convictions but generated significant media coverage during your re-election campaign. The hearing room had become a feeding frenzy. Every major news outlet was streaming live coverage. Political commentators on social media dissected every word, every gesture, every telltale sign of Bondi's disintegration. The woman who had positioned herself as a crusader for justice was being exposed as just another politician whose principles were for sale. Republican committee members tried to throw lifelines. "Point of order," shouted Congressman Jordan. "The witness is being badgered with irrelevant questions." But Goldman had established the relevance masterfully. Bondi's credibility was the foundation of her accusations. If that foundation crumbled, everything built on it would collapse as well. "Ms. Bondi," Goldman continued, consulting another page, "your office also received a $15,000 payment from a law firm representing Epstein Associates in 2017. This was listed as payment for a speaking engagement that, according to the firm's own records, never actually took place. How do you explain receiving payment for services you didn't provide?" Bondi gripped the witness table, knuckles white. "These are taken out of context. You're creating a false narrative." "The narrative isn't mine to create, Miss Bondi. I'm simply reading from public records that your own office filed." Goldman's tone remained devastatingly polite. "But perhaps you can help us understand the context. Why would Epstein's legal team pay you for a speech you never gave?" Silence stretched across the chamber. Even Bondi's Republican allies seemed stunned by the scope of Goldman's evidence. The woman who had marched into the hearing demanding answers about a cover-up was being systematically revealed as part of the very corruption she claimed to oppose. Social media had reached critical mass. Video clips of Bondi's meltdown spread across every platform. Memes motzed her transformation from confident prosecutor to stammering defendant. Late-night talk show hosts already had material for weeks of monologues. TikTok users created viral compilations of her nervous gestures, setting her stammering to comedy music. Instagram influencers dissected her body language frame by frame. The real question isn't who covered up evidence about Epstein. The question is how much you were paid to look the other way, and for how long you plan to keep looking the other way. Bondi stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh screech that echoed through the silent chamber. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination." "You're absolutely right," Goldman replied calmly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had just delivered checkmate. "You don't have to sit here, but the evidence will remain, and the American people will draw their own conclusions about your credibility and motivations. History has a way of remembering moments like this, Ms. Bondi." As Bondi gathered her scattered papers with trembling hands, her transformation was complete. The confident prosecutor had become a humiliated politician, exposed by the very standards of evidence and accountability she had claimed to champion. Her exit from the hearing room was captured by dozens of cameras, each click of her heels now sounding like retreat rather than approach. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, editorial boards called for investigations into Bondi's financial dealings. Former colleagues distanced themselves from her accusations. Political allies found other priorities. The woman who had sought to destroy reputations found her own in ruins. Phone calls flooded her office. Donors pulled funding. Speaking engagements were canceled. Her own legal team scrambled, craft damage control statements, but the evidence was too overwhelming, too meticulously documented. Goldman's folder contained years of financial records, email communications, and banking documents that painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning nearly a decade. The most devastating detail emerged when investigative journalists obtained recordings of Bondi's private conversations with Epstein associates. In one particularly damning exchange from 2016, she could be heard discussing which investigations to prioritize and which to quietly shelve. Her voice, captured on FBI surveillance equipment, casually negotiated the price of her silence. But perhaps the most damaging revelation was still to come. As reporters dug deeper into Goldman's evidence, they discovered that Bondi's anti-Epstein crusade wasn't motivated by justice at all. It was an attempt to deflect attention from her own compromising relationships before they became public. She had learned that Goldman possessed the financial records weeks earlier and launched her preemptive strike, hoping to discredit him before he could expose her. In the end, her demand for missing Epstein evidence accomplished exactly what she had hoped to prevent. It focused intense scrutiny on everyone connected to the case, including herself. Her 19 seconds of righteous indignation had triggered an avalanche of accountability that buried her own carefully protected secrets. Confidence without facts is the fastest path to public humiliation. When someone mistakes theater for truth, the spotlight eventually finds every flaw in their performance. Pam Bondi learned this lesson in the most public way possible, surrounded by cameras and witnessed by millions. What happens when accusers become the accused? When the hunter becomes the hunted? Sometimes the most revealing evidence isn't what's missing, but what's hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to surface. If this story of political accountability and unexpected reversals entertained or educated you, like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments when power meets truth. What's the most shocking political reversal you've witnessed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This dramatized story is inspired by real events and public figures. All dialogue and specific incidents are fictional for commentary and educational purposes. No defamation intended, only illustration of accountability and the consequences of hypocrisy in public service. Even LinkedIn, typically reserved for professional discourse, buzzed with career analysts explaining how Bondi's reputation management had catastrophically backfired. The hashtag Yun 19 seconds to ruin trended globally, as users timed exactly how long it took for Goldman to destroy her credibility from the moment she finished her opening statement. Goldman closed his folder with quiet finality. Ms. Bondi, you came here today demanding accountability for missing Epstein evidence, but the evidence isn't missing at all. It's sitting right here in front of us, showing a pattern of financial relationships between your political organizations and the very network you now claim to be investigating.